What happens when the most forgiving person you know finally says enough? When someone who's absorbed everyone's pain, excused every betrayal, and smiled through every manipulation suddenly stops. Carl Jung discovered something shocking about this moment. It doesn't just change the empath, it exposes the hidden psychological machinery that's been exploiting their kindness for years. Picture this: you're the friend everyone calls during their crisis, the family member who always understands, the partner who forgives before apologies are even offered. You've built your entire identity around being the one who never holds grudges, who always sees the good in people, who keeps the peace at any cost. But what if I told you this endless forgiveness isn't actually virtue? It's a trauma response disguised as compassion. Jung called it survival forgiveness, a psychological defense mechanism that's slowly destroying your soul. And when it finally breaks, something extraordinary happens. Every mask falls away, not just from the people who've been using you, but from yourself. The person staring back at you in the mirror is someone you've never met, your authentic self, emerging from decades of emotional servitude. This is your story, this is your awakening, and it's about to get intense. The great unmasking, when energy vampires lose their food source, the first sign that everything's changing, hits like a lightning bolt of clarity. You're sitting across from someone who's hurt you again, and they're doing what they always do, the familiar dance of fake remorse, mixed with subtle blame shifting. But something's different this time. Instead of the automatic, "it's okay" rising to your lips, you feel something else entirely. Silence. Sacred, powerful silence. This is what Jung called the collision with the shadow, the moment when everything you've suppressed comes crashing into consciousness. For empaths, this collision reveals a truth that's both terrifying and liberating. Your endless forgiveness was never about them. It was about your own terror of abandonment, conflict, and being seen as the bad person. But here's where it gets fascinating. The moment you stop automatically absorbing their emotional waste, they sense it before you even speak. It's like energy vampires have a sixth sense for when their food source is drying up. You haven't said a word about changing, but suddenly, they're working overtime to guilt you back into your old role. They're love-bombing you with excessive praise. They're manufacturing crises that somehow only you can solve. They're weaponizing their vulnerability to extract your forgiveness. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his practice. He wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what he discovered about empaths was revolutionary. They weren't being irritated by their own reflection in others. They were being irritated by people who had learned to exploit their compassion as a renewable resource. The awakening empath suddenly sees the manipulation tactics they were blind to before. You recognize love bombing for what it is, not genuine affection, but a calculated strategy to keep you emotionally available. You spot guilt trips disguised as vulnerability. You see how your empathy was weaponized against your own boundaries. Most shocking of all, you realize how many people in your life have never actually apologized to you. They've just learned to trigger your forgiveness response without ever taking real accountability. This is when what I call the empathy exploitation cycle becomes visible. It's a three-step process that's been running your relationships for years. First, someone violates your boundaries. Second, they offer just enough remorse to activate your forgiveness programming. Third, they return to boundary-violating behavior, knowing you'll forgive them again. Rinse and repeat. But when you stop participating in this cycle, the entire social ecosystem built around your self-sacrifice begins to collapse. People who seemed loving reveal their manipulation. Relationships built on kindness expose their exploitation. Family members who praised you for being so understanding suddenly accuse you of changing. Friends who never reciprocated your emotional labor mysteriously become too busy to maintain the friendship. This is the great sorting that Jung believed was essential for authentic transformation. Relationships based on exploitation dissolve, while genuine connections deepen. Some people will disappear when you stop being their emotional dumping ground. Others will try to guilt you back into your old role with phrases like "you used to be so nice" or "I miss the old you." But a few, the real ones, will respect your boundaries and meet you in genuine reciprocity. The most profound shift happens in your energy. Jung wrote that your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. The awakening empath finally looks inward and sees their own depleted state. You notice how drained you feel after certain interactions. you start recognizing the difference between genuine remorse and manipulative guilt. Most importantly, you stop feeling responsible for other people's emotional regulation. This energy reversal is like installing a psychological firewall. Instead of automatically absorbing everyone's emotional chaos, you start questioning, is this mine to carry? You begin to feel your own feelings instead of everyone else's. Your intuition, no longer clouded by the need to please, becomes laser-sharp. You can sense emotional predators from a mile away because you're no longer participating in the dance that makes their manipulation possible. The masks are falling, and there's no going back to the performance you used to call love. The death of the endless understander, why your people-pleasing persona, had to die. The second phase of the empath's awakening is perhaps the most disorienting. Jung called it the death of the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted. For empaths, this persona is the endlessly understanding one, the person who always has emotional space for others, who never gets truly angry, who can rationalize anyone's bad behavior. But when you stop forgiving automatically, this mask becomes impossible to maintain. It starts with small rebellions. You stop saying it's fine when it's clearly not fine. You stop making excuses for people's bad behavior. You stop performing emotional availability for people who have never been emotionally available to you. These might seem like minor changes, but they send seismic waves through your social network because everyone's gotten used to the old you. The you who absorbed their guilt so they could sleep peacefully while you lay awake questioning your own worth. Jung warned that dropping the persona would feel terrifying because so much of your identity has been built around being the good one. You've been the family mediator, the friend who always listens, the partner who never holds grudges. But this role wasn't chosen from strength, it was assigned by trauma. Somewhere along the way, you learned that your worth was tied to your ability to absorb pain without complaint. You became addicted to being needed, even when that need was destroying you. The end of emotional labor without reciprocity feels like social death, because you don't know who you are without the performance. Who are you if you're not the person? Everyone turns to what's your value if you're not constantly giving. These questions terrify the ego, but they delight the soul, because finally, you get to find out who you really are beneath all that compulsive karaoke. And this is where the guilt immunity develops. Jung observed that guilt is often internalized shame from others who benefit from our compliance. When empaths stop forgiving reflexively, they experience something revolutionary. They stop feeling guilty for having standards. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You recognize that people who try to guilt you back into automatic forgiveness are revealing their investment in your self-abandonment. The transformation isn't just internal, it's energetic. People around you start treating you differently, and many of them don't like it. They preferred the version of you who absorbed their emotional chaos without pushback. They miss the you who made them feel better about themselves by never holding them accountable. Some will try to shame you back into your old role, with phrases like you've become selfish, or you're not the person I married. But here's what Jung understood that they don't. Healthy selfishness isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation finally coming online. It's the integration of your shadow. Those parts of yourself you abandoned to maintain relationships that were never truly mutual. Your capacity for righteous anger, sacred boundaries, and protective selfishness aren't character flaws. They're psychological immune responses that should have been active all along. The most shocking revelation in this phase is recognizing how much of your love was actually fear-based control. You kept the peace not because you were naturally peaceful, but because conflict terrified you. You forgave quickly, not because you were spiritually evolved, but because holding people accountable felt too dangerous. You were endlessly understanding not because you were wise, but because you were afraid that setting boundaries would result in abandonment. This recognition isn't shameful, it's liberating. It means you can finally love from wholeness rather than woundedness, give from choice rather than compulsion. Jung distinguished between unconscious and conscious psychological processes, and this is where conscious forgiveness begins to emerge. Forgiveness that serves the soul, not the ego. Forgiveness that doesn't happen immediately after wrongdoing, but comes after telling, after boundary setting, after natural consequences have been felt. As the endless understander dies, something beautiful is born, your authentic self. You discover preferences you never knew you had because you were always accommodating others. You find your voice after years of silence. You realize you have needs, desires, and boundaries that are just as valid as everyone else's. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung said, is becoming who you truly are. And that journey begins with refusing to be who everyone else needs you to be. Sacred rage and pattern recognition. When your psychic immune system finally activates, there's a moment in every empath's awakening that feels like a psychological earthquake. You're looking back at years of relationships, interactions, and betrayals, and suddenly you see the patterns with crystal clarity. It's not just that you were mistreated, it's that you were systematically conditioned to accept mistreatment as love. The rage that rises isn't the destructive kind. Jung called it sacred rage, the protective force that says never again. This anger might terrify you at first, because empaths are trained to see their anger as dangerous, selfish, or proof that they're becoming the bad person they've always feared being. But Jung understood that anger is often suppressed wisdom. Your rage isn't toxic, it's information. It's your psyche screaming about all the boundaries you never set, all the violations you minimized, all the times you betrayed yourself to keep others comfortable. You feel fury about the friend who only called during their crises, but was mysteriously unavailable during yours. You're angry about the family member who used your empathy to avoid taking responsibility for their behavior. You're enraged about the romantic partner who kept you trauma-bonded through cycles of hurt and hollow apologies. This anger isn't about becoming vengeful, it's about your soul finally having permission to feel what it's been suppressing for years. But here's where it gets really interesting. As this sacred rage activates, so does something Jung called differentiated consciousness. The ability to see clearly, without emotional fog. Your pattern recognition goes into overdrive. And suddenly, you can spot emotional predators before they fully reveal themselves. You recognize the cycle: transgression, fake remorse, love bombing, repeat. You see the same manipulation tactics across different people, different relationships, different contexts. You start noticing how certain people test your boundaries within the first few interactions. They'll make a small inappropriate comment or request to see how you respond. If you laugh it off or accommodate them, they've identified you as someone whose empathy can be exploited. If you address it directly, they often disappear, which tells you everything you need to know about their intentions. This isn't paranoia, it's developed discernment. You begin to understand that emotional predators have a radar for empathic people, the same way empaths have a radar for wounded people. They can sense your willingness to absorb their emotional chaos, your fear of conflict, your desperate need to be seen as good. They know exactly which buttons to push to activate your trauma responses and keep you locked in cycles of giving without receiving. The pattern recognition extends beyond individual relationships to entire systems. You start seeing how families, workplaces, and social groups often have an unofficial designated empath, someone whose role is to absorb everyone else's emotional waste so the system can function without anyone else having to do their own psychological work. You realize you've been playing this role in multiple contexts, and it's been slowly killing your spirit. Jung observed that highly sensitive people often have enhanced intuitive abilities, but empaths frequently doubt their perceptions because they've been gaslit into thinking their sensitivity makes them too emotional or dramatic. When you stop automatically forgiving and start trusting your gut, your intuitive hits become undeniable. You can feel someone's emotional state beneath their words. You can sense manipulation before it fully manifests. You know when someone's apology is genuine versus when it's just another attempt to reset your boundaries. This awakened discernment allows you to see the difference between people who are genuinely struggling and people who are professionally victimized. The genuinely struggling person takes accountability, appreciates your support, and works towards solutions. The professionally victimized person wants your emotional energy, but not your solutions. They're not looking to heal, they're looking for someone to enable their dysfunction while making them feel better about it. Your sacred rage becomes the fire that forges new boundaries. Not walls that keep everyone out, but selective barriers that protect your energy for people and situations worthy of it. You learn to feel deeply without absorbing everything. You develop the ability to see others' pain without making it your responsibility. You become what Jung would call compassionately detached, caring without carrying. The empath, who has integrated their sacred rage, becomes dangerous to systems built on empathic exploitation, and that's exactly as it should be. The authenticity virus, how your transformation infects everyone around you. When an empath stops forgiving automatically, they don't just change themselves, they change the entire social ecosystem around them. Jung believed that individual transformation creates collective change, and nowhere is this more evident than when empaths reclaim their psychological sovereignty. What I call the authenticity virus begins to spread, and it's simultaneously beautiful and terrifying to witness. The first people to feel the impact are those closest to you: family members, romantic partners, longtime friends. They've built their relationship with you around certain unspoken agreements. You'll absorb their emotional chaos. You'll make excuses for their behavior. You'll prioritize their comfort over your own truth. When you start showing up authentically instead of compliantly, it forces them to confront their own patterns. Your courage to set boundaries gives others permission to examine their own boundaryless relationships. Your refusal to enable dysfunction exposes the systems that depend on empathic compliance. Your authentic self-expression reminds others that they don't have to perform to be loved. This is why your transformation feels so threatening to some people. You're not just changing yourself, you're changing the rules of engagement for everyone in your orbit. Jung understood that consciousness is contagious. When one person in a family system starts operating from authenticity instead of people-pleasing, it creates what therapists call a therapeutic disturbance. Suddenly, the family's dysfunction can't hide behind the empath's endless understanding. The person who used to smooth over conflicts stops playing that role. The one who absorbed everyone's guilt stops carrying emotional responsibility for others. The designated fixer refuses to rescue people from the natural consequences of their choices. This creates what looks like chaos but is actually the healthy collapse of an unhealthy system. Family members might accuse you of changing or becoming selfish. What they're really saying is that you're no longer participating in the dysfunctional dynamics that allowed them to avoid their own psychological work. Your authenticity is holding up a mirror to their own inauthenticity, and many people would rather attack the mirror than examine what it's reflecting. But here's the beautiful part. Some people rise to meet your authenticity with their own. Your romantic partner might start setting boundaries they never had the courage to set before. Your children watch you model healthy relationships and learn that love doesn't require self-erasure. Friends who've been trapped in their own people-pleasing patterns find inspiration in your transformation. Colleagues who've been enabling workplace dysfunction start speaking up about problems they previously suffered in silence. Jung called this phenomenon psychological contagion, the way consciousness spreads through social networks. When you stop participating in unconscious relationship patterns, you make unconsciousness impossible for everyone around you. People either evolve to meet your new level of authenticity, or they remove themselves from your life because they can't maintain their dysfunctional patterns in your presence. This is where conscious relationships begin to emerge, connections between two whole people, rather than two wounded halves seeking completion. You start attracting people who can meet your authenticity with their own. You form relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual wounding. You love from overflow rather than lack. These conscious relationships don't need constant forgiveness because they're built on honesty from the start. Conflicts get addressed immediately rather than suppressed until they explode. The authenticity virus spreads beyond your immediate circle to every boundary you set. Gives some stranger permission to set theirs. Every time you choose conscious response over automatic reaction, you model a different way of being human. Every moment you refuse to carry someone else's emotional responsibility, you contribute to the collective healing of empathic exploitation. Jung observed that individuals who complete the individuation process, becoming who they truly are, often become what he called wounded healers. They can help others without losing themselves because they've learned to maintain their own psychological boundaries while remaining compassionate. You become a lighthouse, providing illumination without chasing ships in the dark. Your transformation, from automatic forgiveness to conscious choice, isn't just personal healing, it's revolutionary. You're breaking generational patterns of empathic exploitation, showing others that sensitivity doesn't require self-erasure, and proving that empaths can be both soft and strong. Jung would call this your contribution to the collective unconscious, the shared psychological space that influences all of humanity. The authenticity virus you're spreading is exactly what the world needs. More real empaths who love from wholeness, serve from choice, and forgive from wisdom. The birth of the conscious empath, your revolutionary act of self-love. The final stage of the empath's transformation is the most paradoxical and profound. When you stop forgiving everyone, you finally learn to forgive yourself. When you stop absorbing everyone's guilt, you release your own shame. The person who spent years betraying their own boundaries to maintain relationships finally becomes able to love themselves not despite their humanity, but because of it. Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and for empaths, this terror has a specific flavor. You have to forgive yourself for staying too long in toxic situations. You have to forgive yourself for mistaking trauma bonds for love. You have to forgive yourself for teaching people how to exploit your kindness. Most difficult of all, you have to forgive yourself for abandoning your own divine worth in service of keeping others comfortable. This self-forgiveness isn't a one-time event, it's an ongoing practice of self-compassion that revolutionizes how you move through the world. You stop punishing yourself for having needs. You stop feeling guilty for taking up space. You recognize that your sensitivity isn't a character flaw that needs to be managed. It's a gift that needs to be protected and honored. The conscious empath that emerges from this process is unlike anything the world expects. You're still deeply feeling, still highly intuitive, still naturally compassionate. But now you're also boundaried, discerning, and fiercely protective of your own energy. You can hold space for others' pain without absorbing it. You can offer support without taking responsibility for outcomes. You can love deeply without losing yourself. This transformation creates what Jung called psychological wholeness, the ability to respond from your full range of human capacities rather than just your wounded empathic patterns. You integrate both your capacity for compassion and your capacity for discernment. You become someone who can feel everyone's emotions but chooses carefully which ones deserve your energy. You develop what I call selective empathy, the wisdom to know when your sensitivity serves healing and when it enables dysfunction. The conscious empath becomes dangerous to systems built on empathic exploitation because you can no longer be manipulated through guilt, obligation, or the threat of abandonment. You understand that people who truly love you want you to have boundaries, not break them. You recognize that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, not mutual wounding. You know the difference between supporting someone's growth and enabling their stagnation. Your forgiveness, when it comes, is now sacred and intentional. It doesn't happen immediately after wrongdoing but comes after truth-telling, after justice, after the natural consequences have been felt. Jung distinguished between true forgiveness and what he called the suppression of a justifiable reaction. Your conscious forgiveness honors the wound while releasing the grudge. It sees clearly while choosing not to be consumed by resentment. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of your transformation is how it affects the collective. When empaths learn conscious forgiveness, they break generational patterns of emotional servitude. You model healthy relationships for your children. You refuse to participate in family dysfunction. You show others that empathy doesn't require self-erasure. You become living proof that sensitive people can be both soft and strong. Your journey from automatic forgiveness to conscious choice becomes a beacon for other empaths who are still trapped in cycles of giving without receiving. They see you living authentically and realize it's possible for them too. Your refusal to carry others' emotional responsibility gives them permission to set down their own inappropriate burdens. Your integration of shadow and light shows them that wholeness is possible. Jung believed that individuals who complete the individuation process contribute to what he called the collective healing. Every empath who learns to love from wholeness rather than woundedness raises the frequency of human consciousness. Every person who breaks free from empathic exploitation makes it a little easier for the next person to recognize and escape their own emotional prison. Your transformation isn't selfish, it's necessary, not just for you, but for a world that desperately needs conscious empaths, boundaried healers, and people who understand that true service comes from fullness, not depletion. When an empath stops forgiving automatically and starts loving consciously, they don't just save themselves,